I've been to Australia many times. I've learned a lot about Australia. A lot of my American stereotypes of the country were changed on my first trip there. Some of them were spot on. It's a beautiful country. The people have a great sense of humor. The nature is beautiful. But you mentioned about the politics, and for sure I saw that because I love to talk about not so much politics as policy, especially foreign policy. And I couldn't find anybody in Australia who wanted to talk to me about those things. But that was a long time ago. And I was going to ask you, you just sort of confirmed it with yourself personally, but do you think that happened with a lot of Australians, that COVID has changed things a lot now?
Oh man, yeah. A lot of people really woke up and people started talking about these things because Australia, we're a very insular country. We're so far separated from everything and we've got our own little thing going on. And if you try and talk to people about, for example, like 20th century history and all the atrocities that happened during that time, they probably won't really know much about it. They don't really care too much for it. Whereas people who grew up in, for example, let's say like the Balkans or in like places in Eastern Europe, like they've got this history of communism and this history of oppression and civil wars, and they have to kind of understand it. It's a part. It's like in their blood. Whereas Australians, it's just life is just pretty cushy. And then COVID rocked the boat a little bit, and people started to wake up and say, "Hey, I mean, is this normal that we've got people who are just protesting, being locked in their houses and protesting mandatory vaccines, and the riot police are coming out and beating them up, and like they look like the Gestapo in their black uniforms, and they're coming and beating them up in the street? I'm like, what are we seeing here?" And then there were a few very intelligent commentators that were sort of shining a light on it as well.
Yeah, I know it surprised a lot of Americans that the reaction of the Australian government, because, you know, a lot of governments overreacted, but I don't think anyone before COVID would have guessed that Australia would have been like beyond what anyone could imagine. That, you know, it was really quite spectacular to see. I mean, I spent a lot of time with COVID. I was in China when COVID started. I spent time in Hong Kong and Vietnam and Thailand. I spent a lot of time in Ukraine during COVID. And what was going on in Australia was always like people in every country were watching this, like, what is going on in Australia? It's really, I don't know if your public health department people have just way too much power, or I have no idea why the reaction in Australia was so over the top.
Well, it's because of the apathy. That's the problem. I think America, they had an instant pushback when these sort of things started, like lockdowns, and people started questioning it straight away because it's in their nature. But Australians were just safety, safety, safety. They said, yes, government, you do whatever you want. We are at your mercy. And the more strict, the more popular. Like the opinion polls for the governors governors, we call them premiers, but governors for you guys in Australia, that were really strict and going for COVID zero. I didn't even know if you guys had this, but their thing was that they wanted 0 cases of COVID in the whole state. That's what they wanted. And the opinion polls for these guys and girls who were doing that were just ridiculously popular. And people were so happy about these authoritarian means because there was no COVID. But there with no foresight to the potential ramifications of what that might lead to, and with no idea of, like, in history, like what this means when governments start to clamp down like this, and the idea of giving government too much power so that they never give it back. There wasn't any of that sort of like understanding and like external thinking about what was going on.
Well, it also shows just basically being uninformed, because even 10 minutes of Google searching, you could have figured out that there's no way that you're going to stop a coronavirus like that. It's not going to happen. Being on an island like you in New Zealand are, you can delay it for sure, and you did, but you're not, once it gets there, it's going to get there, and no place on earth is going to be COVID zero.
Oh yeah.
Even the Chinese figured that out. So that's interesting.